Hey, everybody. Welcome back in to the Molasses Report. All right. I feel like I've hit you guys with a couple of hard topics the past couple weeks, so I'm going to humor it up a little bit this week. Maybe. So, here we go. If you've ever watched Gossip Girl and thought, okay, but why does this show still hit? You're not alone. Because on the surface, it's absurd. Teenagers living alone in penthouses, taking limousines to school, problems involving cotillions and prep schools in Europe, and ruining someone's life before brunch. Objectively, none of this is relatable. But somehow, years later, the show is painfully relevant because Gossip Girl was never about wealth, it was about power, identity, reputation, performance. It was about being watched. It was about growing up in a world where everyone has access to your story, but no one has the full context, which feels familiar in the age of social media. Because whether you grew up on the Upper East Side or on a regular street with regular problems, we all learned the same lesson early. People talk, and once they do, you don't get to control how that story spreads. Someone hears one version of you and decides it's permanent. Someone catches you in one bad season and mistakes it for your personality. Someone repeats something incomplete enough times that eventually it becomes truth. That's the world of Gossip Girl, not luxury, narrative. That's why the show aged so well. It accidentally predicted the emotional reality of social media before social media became what it is now. So today, we're going to break down Gossip Girl not as a teen drama, but as a mirror. One that reflects friendship, reputation, love, ambition, jealousy, performance, and the exhausting pressure to become digestible versions of ourselves for public consumption. XOXO, let's talk. In Gossip Girl, information is power. Who knows what? Who leaks it first? Who benefits when the truth comes out? And who gets destroyed in that process? Gossip isn't background noise in this world, it's infrastructure. And honestly, that didn't stay on TV. In real life, gossip works the same way, just a little quieter. It shows up disguised as a concern, with people saying, well, did you hear what happened? Or, I probably shouldn't say this, but, or, I just thought you deserved to know. And the thing about gossip is that people rarely spread it because they're evil. Usually they spread it because it makes them feel included, important. They have something interesting. Or reality makes them feel relevant. Information creates social closeness. If you know something others don't, you feel powerful. And if you're the first person to share it, even better. But here's what Gossip Girl understood better than most shows: gossip doesn't need to be true to be effective, it just needs to be believable. That's it. Once a narrative sounds right, people stop checking whether it's actually true. That happens everywhere: school, friend groups, families, workplaces, the internet. I mean, how many times have you been misunderstood, then watched that misunderstanding become your reputation? How many times has a half truth followed you longer than the truth ever could? That's why public perception feels so scary. Not because people know everything about you, but because they don't, and they attempt to fill in the blanks. The show wasn't an exaggeration, it was warning us. Serena Vanderwoodson is the girl everyone wants to be, or at least the girl everyone thinks they want to be. She's beautiful without trying. She's magnetic without putting in any effort. She's forgiven constantly, and she's desired automatically. She walks into rooms and people rearrange themselves around her. That archetype still exists. I mean, the effortless cool girl, the naturally liked person, the one who somehow gets grace other people have to earn. But Serena's real struggle isn't privilege, it's identity. Everyone projects onto her. Everyone decides who she is before she does. And no matter how hard she tries to evolve, people drag her back toward the version of herself that they know and prefer. I mean, that feels real because we all get assigned identities early. We're all the reliable one, or the dramatic one, the funny one, the difficult one, the successful one, just the hot mess. Once people become comfortable with a version of you, they resist updates. Growth inconveniences people, especially when your growth disrupts the story that they've been telling themselves about you. And I think Serena represents something really specific: the exhaustion of constantly being perceived. People don't see her, they see their projection of her, which honestly is what visibility feels like now, especially online. People interact with versions of others, curated impressions, with assumptions. And once someone decides who you are, they start filtering everything through that lens. You can change completely and they'll still speak to that old version. That's why reinvention feels lonely sometimes, because internally you've changed, but externally everyone still expects the same you. Serena's biggest flaw isn't recklessness, it's believing she owes everyone access to her life, which a lot of us struggle with. You feel obligated to explain, you overshare to avoid misunderstanding, you try to manage perception instead of protecting peace. But not everyone deserves full access to you just because they're curious. That's a lesson Serena never fully learns. Blair is control wrapped in ambition. She plans. She's strategic. She curates. She earns. Everything about Blair says, if I work hard enough, I'll finally feel secure. And beneath all the confidence is someone deeply terrified that if she stops performing, she'll disappear. Blair believes love must be earned, status must be protected, and vulnerability is weakness, which is exhausting, but also incredibly recognizable. Blair represents the part of us that ties self worth to achievement, the part that believes rest has to be justified, that softness is dangerous, that failure is humiliation. Honestly, modern culture rewards Blair types constantly. Productivity becomes morality, burnout becomes proof of ambition, exhaustion becomes a personality trait. We praise people for overextending themselves, especially women, especially high achieving women. And when your identity gets built around being the competent one, you stop allowing yourself to be human. Because what happens if you fail? What happens if you're average for just 1 second? What happens if you're no longer exceptional? For Blair, failure feels like erasure, which is why every setback destroys her emotionally. Not because she's dramatic, though she is, but because she doesn't know who she is outside of performance. A lot of people relate to that. The fear that if you stop achieving, you stop mattering. Your value is conditional, that people only love the polished version of you. That's the tragedy underneath Blair Waldorf. Not ambition, but conditional self worth. All right, now we gotta go in, talk about Chuck Bass here, because Gossip Girl came from an era obsessed with romanticizing emotionally unavailable men. Chuck is powerful, mysterious. He's damaged. He's very complicated. Television spent years convincing people that cruelty becomes depth if someone is attractive enough, which unfortunately shapes an entire generation's understanding of romance. The I can fix him fantasy, the belief that emotional inconsistency equals passion, the idea that suffering for love makes it more meaningful. Confusion, though, is not chemistry. Instability is not intimacy. And being chosen by someone emotionally unavailable is not the same thing as being loved well. A lot of people watched Chuck and Blair and internalized intensity as romance. Intensity burns out, though. Healthy love is usually much quieter. It's consistent, which television rarely glamorizes because peace doesn't create season cliffhangers. But in real life, peace matters more. And I think rewatching shows as adults becomes fascinating because you realize the characters you admired at 16 are sometimes the exact people you would avoid now. Dan Humphrey starts as the outsider, the observer, the critic, the moral compass, until he isn't. And that's what makes his arc interesting. Dan judges the world he desperately wants access to. He criticizes privilege while craving it himself. Eventually, he adapts, because proximity to power changes people. There's an uncomfortable truth that the show keeps returning to, which we all think we'd remain untouched by influence. We think, if I had money, I'd stay grounded. I wouldn't change. If I had visibility, I'd stay humble. If I had that much power, I'd stay ethical. Environments shape people. Access changes priority. Attention changes identity. Social media proved that faster than anything. People start online, authentic and casual, then slowly become brands of themselves, more polished, more strategic, more consumable. Not because they're fake, but because being watched changes how people perform. Dan's story is ultimately about becoming the thing you once criticized, which is a lot more universal than we like admitting. Now, Nate Archibald is probably the most realistic character on the show, and not just because he's the one I'd actually want to date, but not because he's the most moral, not because he's the smartest, but because Nate actually spends the entire series trying to figure out what he wants versus what's been chosen for him. Honestly, that's life for a lot of people. Nate grows up inside heavy expectations, family legacy, money, politics, status. Everyone around him had a plan for his life before he's old enough to form one himself. That pressure is subtle sometimes, because not all pressure is aggressive, but sometimes pressure can sound like, that'd be good for you. This is what people like us to do. Or, you'd be crazy to walk away from this. Nate represents the kind of person who looks free on the outside, but internally feels trapped by other people's expectations, which is incredibly relatable, especially if you've been the potential person, the person everyone believes in, the person who's supposed to succeed, the person who keeps getting told they've so much opportunity, because eventually opportunity starts feeling like obligation. And one of the saddest things about Nate is how often he drifts. Not because he's lazy, but because he's disconnected from himself. He spends so much time reacting to the lives around him that he struggles to define his own. A lot of people do that without realizing it. You follow the path that makes sense, the relationship people expected, the career that sounds impressive, the version of success that photographs well. One day, you wake up wondering, did I choose this? Or did I just keep saying yes long enough that it became my life? That's Nate's entire emotional arc. He's constantly surrounded by louder personalities: Blair's ambition, Serena's chaos, Chuck's intensity, Dan's judgment, which makes his uncertainty look passive. But uncertainty is real. A lot of people aren't dramatic enough to implode publicly. They just quietly lose connection to themselves over time. Nate represents something else: the fear of disappointing people by becoming different. Because choosing your own life means rejecting someone else's vision for it. And that's uncomfortable. Growth doesn't look like becoming someone new. Sometimes it looks like finally admitting you never wanted the life you were performing in the first place. Well, let's be real. If Gossip Girl aired today, it wouldn't be a blog. It would be Instagram, TikTok, group chats, private stories, screenshots, soft launches, close friends lists. The show predicted something huge: a world where everyone is simultaneously performing and observing, where perception matters more than intention, where context disappears, where mistakes become searchable, where everyone develops a public self, whether they want one or not. And The emotional pressure of that is enormous because being perceived constantly changes people psychologically. You start editing yourself in real time, thinking about how moments look while you're still living them, curating experiences instead of experiencing them. Even friendships become partially performative online. People don't have relationships anymore, they have to have visual relationships. And visibility creates pressure to appear happy, close, successful, interesting. Meanwhile, everyone's comparing their private life to other people's edited private life narratives, which is exactly the emotional ecosystem Gossip Girl lived in. The technology changed, but human behavior didn't. One of the most unrealistic parts of Gossip Girl, though, isn't the wealth. It's how often people forgave each other. The betrayals on that show. Yet somehow everyone still ends up at brunch. But here's what is realistic: staying in relationships past their expiration date because history feels heavier than harm. We tolerate versions of connection that hurt us because starting over feels scarier, because history creates emotional gravity. And sometimes people confuse longevity with compatibility. But shared history alone cannot sustain healthy relationships, not friendships, not family dynamics, not romance. That's the question that the show keeps asking. How much damage are you willing to normalize just to avoid losing familiar people? Gossip Girl wasn't just entertainment, it was a study in power, perception, identity, performance, and the emotional cost of being seen. And the reason it resonates is simple: we're all just trying to survive in a world that watches us, that judges us, that talks about us, that misunderstands us, and asks us to stay consumable while we're still figuring ourselves out. So maybe the goal isn't controlling the narrative. Maybe it's learning not to abandon yourself trying to manage one. XOXO. This has been the Molasses Report.